so we don't.
So good afternoon. Apologize that we're a little late getting started. It'll be the four of us today, counselors. Counselor Signer is home with the flu. And I'll turn this meeting over to Mr. Murphy. Thanks. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Mayor Walker. Today is a budget forum that is really focused on hearing from the public, but we will have a brief presentation of some information just in case we have some folks joining us new to the process. And we'll go ahead and get started. This is to let you all know that over the last 14 years, what the trends have been about the percent change in the budget. In the year that we are proposing, FY20, the budget is growing by about 5%. And there is some good news about our economy and some of the new revenues outside of those that have been proposed. We do have more than 39,000 jobs within our 10 miles here in the city, which is good growth. We have the lowest unemployment in the state, below 3%. In general, when we have a vacancy in the city, they are filled very quickly, 4.5% citywide, 2.5% downtown. And there are a lot of large new developments growing downtown, Preston Avenue, West Main Street. The budget is structured around some major themes that have been discussed previously with council on a number of work sessions and retreats, including affordable housing, preserving and enhancing our services, investing in employees, focusing on efficiencies, being a strong support for the schools, and working within our strategic plan and the council priorities. This slide is just to demonstrate that the bulk of all the money comes from local taxes, including, of course, real estate, lodging, meals, B-poll. So, the revenue projections for real estate. We did experience some growth in real estate, a little bit more than 7% of what we had projected from last year. The assessments were up in general just under 8% citywide. On the residential side, about 8.7%. The manager's proposed budget is to have the rate remain the same at 95 cents per $100 assessed value, although council has advertised the ability to go up to 97 cents should that be chosen to do so. So the impact of the real estate tax, this is just an indication here in the PowerPoint about at some different assessed values of homes, what is the change on average that is already happening, right? So you see the different thresholds here, and this is to indicate about how much more is coming out of someone's budget. We need to understand at all times, right? This is based on the average rate. You may live in a house in Belmont or 10th and Page that went up 18%, and somebody may live in a house that didn't change in the assessed value. This is based off the average. At some point during the budget discussions, we were comparing some income from the Consumer Expenditures Survey from Bureau of Labor Statistics, and we had some good data about the meals spending of consumers, and we wanted to look at that in the same way in deciles, so each of these representing 10% of the total number of residential real estate parcels in the city. And so this tells us a little bit about what that would mean at those different values, the impact on those value homes. I think probably what's most interesting to me about this is that, 50%, right, half of all the residential parcels in the city are under $300,000, that 296, so those first 5 deciles. And where we have been doing the work looking at enhancements to CHAP in the manager's budget and some further work by Commissioner Divers and Mayor Walker, about 70% of the households or structures fall under 375. In the manager's budget, it is a projected change in the meals tax. However, want you to see that in general, in all the years that we look back, meals tax grows. And that is in a per penny look, not due to a rate change. Want to say here that since this is one of the more hotly debated items, that it generates about $2.5 million, just under $2.5 million per penny on the meals tax. We proposed a change from 5 to 6%. This chart is intended to indicate what the impact is on your meal. When you go out for a sandwich that's $10, essentially today you pay a little over $11, you would pay 10 cents more. And so on and so forth as you change the price of whatever meal you're considering. This is the information I was referencing before about meals tax, and it's really just to indicate that regardless of income, that based on federal level data, that the impact of the meals tax rate increase that we're proposing in somebody's monthly budget is somewhere between $1.25 for people in the lowest income brackets up to a little over $6 for folks closer to the top. Meals tax is in general paid by about 65% by local people, the other 35% by visitors and folks who do not live in the city. Lodging tax. This is another area that the manager's budget proposes an increase, going from a rate of 7 to 8%. I want to emphasize here, as is the case with meals, this would put us basically in the middle of the state. These are not making the city a leader by any means in any of these rates. I believe we'd be equal to or tied with 27 of the 38 independent cities on meals, and this, I think, puts us tied with about 12 other localities between 5 and 17. So there is a proposed increase from 7 to 8%. Obviously, transient occupancy tax or lodging is paid by people visiting the city. This chart is just an illustration about the extra percent and what it means at different price points on the final bill. Personal property tax, as most people are aware, is the property tax paid on things like cars, boats, etc. There is an increase, not in the rate projected, but on the actual revenues, and basically because people are buying newer vehicles, I would say. Sales and use, we have a bit of an increase, about just under 3%, so there is new revenue in this 20 budget. General fund expenditures, most of the money that the city generates and is expended goes to schools, followed by public safety and healthy families and communities, which is followed then by infrastructure. But as you can see on the left-hand side there, most of the money goes to local contribution to schools. I referenced briefly earlier one of the enhancements that's in the manager's budget, which is a priority on affordable housing. And while there's a lot of that in the CIP, one thing on the general operating side is a program administered by the Commissioner of Revenue. And what we proposed to do was to change the income threshold from households earning $50,000 a year up to 65, and you see what the categories are, anywhere from $375 off the second half taxes up to full relief. There is another couple scenarios that have been devised that we've been talking about in work sessions, and I believe on Tuesday night we'll discuss a new set of scenarios where we keep the income assumption the same as it is today at $50,000, but look at other ways to provide more full relief to folks. So in the FY20 budget, what are the main expenditures? You see a total contribution to the schools of $57.3 million, 3.3 of that being new money, so a 6.2% increase, and to the schools, $6.5 million on the capital side, $3 million of that being a study for the planning, design, drawings for the possible school reconfiguration that would put a centralized preschool on the campus where Walker is today and push sixth graders out to Buford in a reconfigured and renovated Buford. Other expenditure drivers are employee compensation, moving forward with living wage, which we've been doing for several years and getting up to $15 an hour, cost of living adjustment to deal with both cost of living, retention, and compression for employees and market, and to pay the full year costs of a salary increase that was implemented at the beginning of this month for sworn police officers. This is not a budget that has a change in the healthcare premiums for employees, and we are funding a new self-service benefits portal. There are a few positions. I believe there was originally in the general fund $5.1 million in new requests, and a few of those positions have been added, very few of them for the full year, but I'll just highlight a few of those. The centralized safety coordinator is someone who works in risk management, serves the entire city, improves our training and safety practices throughout the organization. That would be, we're trying to save some dollars there based on the request by holding off till January for the hire. The security manager is housed in the police department, also a citywide position, someone to look at our facilities and events and the new environment we find ourselves in with needing to prepare for safety and emergencies. We are offering a great new program in the treasurer's office, so right in the lobby of City Hall, and we're going to make a half-time employee full-time to do so. Our DMV out there on Pantops is the second busiest in the state, and anybody who's waited out there will believe me. And so we're going to start offering not all the services of the full-service DMV, but many of them here in the lobby of City Hall. The NDS Support Services Manager would be a mid-year hire. That's somebody who will report to the Assistant Director and relieve some of the responsibility in that position, which currently has 15 direct reports, and it was identified as one of the main needs in the efficiency study. We really need to do quite a bit more with our full-time drivers in transit. Right now, only about 2/3 of our routes are staffed by regular drivers, and the rest with relief and people working part-time. So while we think that we need as many as 14 new full-time drivers, this budget is adding 4. And the reason that the delta here is not quite as large as you would think to add 4 people is it's people already working mostly full-time. They're just not receiving full benefits. So that's what we're correcting here. And then where there is some efficiency in transferring stormwater maintenance operations from Public Works to the Utilities Department, and that will be dealt with in the regular rate structure. Outside nonprofit agencies are in a year where the council has decided to kind of hold them harmless and freeze the allocations from previous years. A couple things to note here. One is that in the year we're in, we started a program at the General District Court, a therapeutic docket, partnering with a number of criminal justice partners, but housed as the fiscal agent, Offender Aid and Restoration, intended to really help people with mental health issues who are interacting with the criminal justice system. And then finally, there are agencies that are either quasi-governmental or contractual, who we analyze their budgets a little bit differently than the ABRT process directly with our budget staff, and there are some increases and decreases among those agencies. You can see that all three of the big public safety entities, the Jail Detention Center and ECC, are all decreasing. The library and Jaunt are going up just a bit. The CIP is a pretty aggressive one. It's the biggest one we've ever had, particularly in year one. So in general, we'll be making new payments to our debt service, about $850,000 a year every year going forward. And part of this is funded by $3.2 million that council moved in the year-end appropriation in December. You'll see the CIP in year one, FY 2020, is about $35 million. There's a number of priorities from the community and the council that I think the manager's budget is realizing here. Chief among them is $10.3 million to affordable housing, and the $6.5 million to schools. There are obviously many other investments. So there's a few things, obviously, that have been talked about quite a bit that are not in the 2020 budget. Just quickly, I think the original work session we had with the school board asked for $3.8 million. I worked closely with Dr. Atkins, and we've determined, and they presented a $3.3 million ask to the city, which is funded in this budget. School reconfiguration is at least $55 million. We've funded the study that will allow us in future years of the CIP to discover how we can afford and fund such an expense. The Affordable Housing Fund, folks who are intimately aware of the CIP will see that there's a heading there, and there's some zeros across that. That's not to say that the affordable housing priority was zeroed out. The most we've ever spent in any year on affordable housing in the city of Charlottesville that I'm aware of is $3.9 million, and this budget spends $10.3 million. However, we did earmark all of the $10.3 million, and there is a question, which we talked about as recently as Thursday night: how can we make some money available for a general application pool? And the manager's office is looking at that, and I'll try and report back on it Tuesday night. CHAP, which I've already talked about previously, is looking at some additional scenarios about how to provide that tax relief for real estate. What's not in the budget is our departments had original operating budget asks that were about $1.39 million more, and those cuts have already been made by budget staff in partnership with the departments. On top of that, there were $5.3 million more in new departmental requests, all of which are not funded at this time. And as we look at a really large CIP and think, wow, that's a lot of money, there were almost $110 million of projects that were proposed that did not make it in. Going forward from today, we'll have a number of public hearings, 4 of them on the budget, 6 in total on Monday night at the regular council meeting, and another work session at Water Street on Tuesday night. Depending on where we are at the end of that Tuesday night, we will meet in City Space the following Wednesday. April 1st will be the last formal council meeting, and I hope that we're on track for a budget approval on April the 8th. You can find all of this information and a whole lot more on our website at charlottesville.org budget. And we're here to take your comments for the rest of our time together.
Are we allowed to comment at all?
Absolutely.
I have thank you, Mr. Murphy, for presenting that. I had a question for my colleagues to ponder, and maybe we can discuss it on Monday or even Tuesday of sorts, but specifically in regards to the schools and the $500,000 from their operating request. I would like to wonder if any of my colleagues would be open to fulfilling $250,000 of that $500,000 request, being if we took essentially a vote the other night. One question or one point of concern for me, and specifically in that regards, is that they only have $600,000 left in their reserve. And some will say, well, that's enough for them to be able to cover this $500,000, but that would deplete their reserve and they would only have $100,000 left. And if they only have $100,000 left, if they have some kind of one-time emergency, they will have to come back and ask us to fill it. Best practices, I was doing some research on best practice from a school board's perspective, ask that you have at least 12 to 15% in your reserve. And they have less than 1% of theirs. They only, again, have $600,000 in their reserve, and then if they have to use 500 of that to fulfill their budget request, they're going to be right back asking us for money. If we're not open to at least fulfilling half of that 250, then I would like for us to give the school some kind of assurance that in the event that they have some kind of major issue or a one-time ask, that we would be willing to help them out, because that is a concern for some of the school board members.
Councilor Bellamy, would you mind if we think about that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't mean like answer right now. Like, think about it.
All right, so we're going to start the public comment. If you would just come up to the mic there, and you can start.
Hi, I'm Catherine Lawn. I live in the city, and I'm here actually, I want to follow up to Councilor Bellamy to ask you to consider funding the full $500,000 that the city schools had to cut from their budget. That money was entirely devoted to positions that would help close the achievement gap and achieve equity in the schools, which is obviously something that we all care deeply about. As a city resident, I can tell you I'm more than willing to pay more in taxes if that money is going toward those kinds of things. So I know specifically that they had to cut a proposed additional AVID teacher. They cut a proposed math teacher who would be focused on vertical realignment between Buford and CHS in math. And they cut an iSTEM program that would provide maker space and technology STEM education that would go across all students. These wouldn't just be students identified as already high achievers. So I would ask that you consider at least Councilor Bellamy's request, if not the full $500,000 in funding.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
It's going to be a quick meeting.
Okay. Well, I hope I'm not the first of people to comment on affordable housing, but I, have talked for years about the homeless and housing instead of handcuffs, and housing that as the baby boomers age, we can, as we stop working and may only have small amounts of monies to live on, that there be housing options for us that we can afford. But I'm looking at a lot of what's been coming out of the last 2 years about housing justice is racial justice. All over this country, we've had zoning laws that have been adopted that definitely segregate by race, and also, whether you believe it or not, Charlottesville's in the middle of a class war. We're in the middle of a class war. Several years ago, you had a consultant come in and do kind of a retail marketing study about who shops the downtown mall, who comes there, And it was very telling that at that time, there were about 20 to 22,000 people that live within a mile's radius of that downtown mall, but it wasn't reflected in the use of people who live close by coming there, because so many of us are forced to go outside of the immediate downtown area to get our needs met, our daily needs met. I'm not talking about healthcare needs, I'm just talking about toilet paper, paper towels, toothpaste, and everything. That, you know, there's a lot that's not there for low-income housing. The tax relief you're talking about for property owners, all the way up to $65,000, that graduated schedule. I think that if I've heard the right total, about 1,000 families would be helped with that tax increase, or that tax reduction, I'm sorry. And I think that's a good thing. I really do. I think that that's an equitable thing. It's equitable on class, it's equitable on race, for sure. And I don't know any corporate hotel chain, especially, shall I say, Marriott, who seems to have the corner on hotels, would not be able to absorb an 8% lodging tax increase. If people are going to come to Charlottesville, they're going to come to Charlottesville for whatever we offer, and it doesn't matter whether the room is $5 more or $10 more. They're going to come here if they want to, whether it's because their child attends UVA, or they're coming to a conference through the medical center or the school, or they're attending some type of cultural event, or they're just checking out the city, you know, or the, you know, immediate vineyards and things that are out in the county and in Nelson County and things like that. I think that's definitely something I can support. I mean, even if you went to the 2% tax increase in order to be able to fund this graduated tax relief program, you know, I choose to be a tenant at this point in my life. And if my rent had to go up a little bit in order to help someone else get a tax break, which could mean the difference of them being able to keep their house or selling it to one of these greasy developers, I would be all, you know, supportive of that for sure. A meals tax increase, I don't know, this first weekend has been kind of the, you know, test of how the cities or how the downtown's going to look. I don't think the people I see eating downtown are going to matter if their meals go up by 10 cents, 15 cents, a quarter. I think what's really bad is that we still have employees that work down there that are not paid a decent wage and cannot live close by where they choose to work. I think that's still a problem that needs to be worked out between the businesses and everything. So hopefully that'll do it. But I am certainly in support of the meals tax increase, the lodging tax increase, and even if it meant my rent going up a 2% real estate tax increase, in order to, for some of the folks that are probably in this room or listening or will be listening or will be seeing, to get some real tax relief. Thank you.
Ms. Carpenter brings up a point that makes me think, oh, we're not, my bad. The mayor's
right.
like, be quiet.
I didn't see
I'll
that.
save it for the end. It's the big sister look, like, be quiet. So I'll follow suit.
Now we want to know.
I'll say it at the end, it's all good.
Okay. My name is Mike Massey. I live on Druid Avenue. I sent you an email stating my position, and I'm really reiterating what the last person just said. Maybe expand on that a little bit. So I'm really, as a homeowner that's, you know, doing okay financially in the city, I am asking you, begging you to raise my taxes, to take a bold step. And I, by the way, I appreciate that you are already taking a big step towards affordable housing, but I'm asking you to send a bigger signal that this is a big and long-term investment in this issue, which we desperately need, which we've been putting off for a really long time. So specifically, I'd like to ask that you fund that CAF at the $1.55 million and expand the relief programs for low-income, tax relief programs for low-income homeowners to include more people eligible for full relief. And just to frame that the way that I'm thinking about it, I think in these sort of yearly budget cycles and electoral politics, we can often be prisoners of the moment. And I know I respect the fact that you have to take into account a lot of constituents' needs and agendas, and many times they are at tension with each other. But I also say, as leaders, you have to make tough decisions that are going to make people unhappy. And to me, a big, bold, long-term housing policy is a policy that looks backwards, that looks to the present, and looks forward. So we're not prisoners of the moment. It looks backwards because we know that for decades and decades, not only have white people and wealthy people been advantaged by policies, we also know that people of color and low-income people have been disadvantaged. They've been divested from. So this is a policy that is owed to people, that is about time. It needs to come. It's a policy of the present because we have thousands of people in this city right now as we speak that are struggling to meet day-to-day needs. That is not acceptable. And it's a policy of the future because there's a vast body of research that says stable, affordable, and safe housing is an investment in higher education, better education, in a healthier community, in a safer community. And that's something we all want, and that saves money in the long run. So this is an investment in the future. So this is not a prisoner of the moment thing. This is about justice, and this is about investing in a future, a better future for all of Charlottesville and not just part of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Elisa Diamond, also a resident of the city. I want to reiterate what some of the earlier speakers have said about making affordable housing a high priority for the city. This is a city that has a huge legacy of racial injustice and economic injustice. So I'm very excited to see the budget allocations towards the money towards the CRHA, the Friendship Court redevelopment, and housing rehabilitation that's currently in the budget. Very happy to see those. Would also like to see $1.55 million for the Charlottesville Affordable Housing Fund and $1 million to the rent subsidy voucher program happen within this budget this year. And I would also love to see, as a homeowner myself, an increase in the real estate tax of 2%, paired with the relief programs that have been mentioned earlier. I would be in support of a lodging tax increase and a meals tax increase as well. Thank you.
We just want to clarify that, you want to clarify, just
Please do.
that the tax relief program actually is what is in the budget.
Okay, great.
Sorry, the rental
Rental
The
assistance.
rental
assistance program.
The 900,000.
And then the one that wasn't in the budget that she stated, though, was the rehabilitation, right? She was listing off things. I just wanted to make sure that was
I see,
clear.
I have those switched.
So you have
then.
those switched.
Okay,
I just
great.
wanted to clarify for anyone else listening who might
Yes.
comment on that.
Great. Well, thank you for clarifying, and yes to both, please. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for taking comments and questions. My name's Lisa Torres, and I am a city resident. Excuse me, I've kind of written my notes down, so I hope you don't mind if I read them. I, like so many here and in previous meetings, fully support the need to actively address our affordable housing and other equity issues within our community. My comments and questions are related to the revenue options that are presented. I have heard these presented and explained by Mr. Murphy in prior sessions, so thank you for that, and the slides and the information that are available to the rest of the community. I'm trying to better understand and grasp what and why some of the counselors are not supporting all of the options at this time. More specifically, the meals tax, which I think is one that several opposed very strongly in the last work session. I would honestly love to hear real and specific reasons rather than generic and glossed over excuses as to why you might oppose this option. I'm trying to give you all the benefit of the doubt that there may be concrete reasons, concrete issues that are informing and leveraging your decisions. As elected officials, you are here to serve all Charlottesville residents, not just the more affluent, privileged, and powerful constituents like business and restaurant owners. I, as one person, am here to acknowledge and publicly admit that I have privilege. This privilege, in case someone doesn't understand what that might mean, equates to many different things. Food security, housing, jobs, wages, education, judicial decisions and actions, etc. We are not a successful and thriving community until those of us, individually and systemically, who have privilege, acknowledge this, admit it, and then take the long overdue steps to make the changes to take care of all of us. What am I and what are the others who have this privilege willing to give up so that no one is left behind? The meals tax and other revenue stream options must be approved to maximize our revenue at this time, and I challenge all people to join me in acknowledging our privilege and giving what we need to give, to be part of the solution rather than perpetuating the wall or barrier to equity and what is right for our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. I've prepared some notes as well, so I'm going to read kind of off my phone here. But my name's Ken Horn. I live in the county, but I work in the city. I'm here just to say that I believe we're really at a critical moment in Charlottesville, kind of post August 11th and 12th, but not just because of what happened here on those dates, but I think we can no longer afford to deny and ignore the historic racial inequities in this city. The public is now really aware of these issues, and especially the importance of affordable housing. You have an opportunity to correct the long-term intentional racial injustices, including policies of segregation, redlining, exclusion, and the purposeful destruction of the Vinegar Hill community and other Black-owned communities in this city. It's really time to right these wrongs and to signal to the city, and especially the most vulnerable among us, that you see them and that you take their struggle seriously. I really encourage you to consider every possible revenue source to assure affordable housing is a top priority, including the meals tax, the lodging tax, real estate tax. If any of you are currently unsure about whether you want to do that, whether you want to make it a top priority in the budget, I really encourage you to try to put yourself into the shoes of a low-income community member or a vulnerable community member. If you don't see yourself already as part of that population. And I just really encourage you to think about the fact that I think it really takes that kind of empathy and that kind of compassion in this day and age to be a leader here, especially in Charlottesville, Virginia, after all that we've been through. I also encourage you to consider the interconnectedness of the affordable housing issue with other issues. I think we can't just see it as one thing, but we need to see how it is interconnected with the wealth gap, how it's interconnected with the achievement gap, how it's interconnected with disproportionate policing and mass incarceration, health disparities, mental health disparities, and all these kinds of issues. A safe and stable, healthy home is a necessary foundation for people to succeed. And so I cannot encourage you enough to prioritize affordable housing in this budget, as well as the equity concerns with the school system that were mentioned before. I feel that too is just one of those really interconnected issues with the affordable housing. So please, in order to make sure that this is a city that works for everyone, not just kind of middle class or upper middle class white folks, but a city that really works for everyone. Please make sure that you're prioritizing affordable housing and equity in the schools and the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone?
I am Elliot, and I live in Charlottesville. I'm a homeowner. I'm here with my wife, and we are here to support the tax increases as well, especially the meals one that I feel like is probably the most debated right now. And we eat out, unfortunately, way too much, and I'm willing to pay much more than a 1% increase.
Hello, my name is Andrea Massey. I'm a city resident, and I'm here to advocate for funding for affordable housing and school equity. funding that can actually achieve the objectives of creating affordable housing for all residents and achieving equity in our school. The amount of wealth that is in this city makes it unacceptable to do anything less. Completely unacceptable. So please do not give in to wealthy constituents for things that they don't need and owe back to other city residents. I commend you on your commitment to some of the affordable housing needs in the current version of the budget. The $3 million to CRHA for public housing redevelopment, the $5.9 million to fund Friendship Court infrastructure improvements, and $500,000 for housing rehabilitation, allowing lower income homeowners to avoid displacement due to home repair demands. I wasn't sure. I did think that there was some $1 million shortfall in what is needed for the rent subsidy voucher program. I'm not sure.
It's in there.
That's funded.
in there.
That is funded. So is it funded at whatever the original? I didn't know if it was like $2 million and it was cut back to $1 million, or it's fully funded.
I think over the course of 2 fiscal years, it was close to that amount. But
Okay.
Go ahead.
Cool.
The budget is $900,000 a year, and that's level funded for the next 5 years in this proposal.
100,000?
900,000.
Okay, gotcha.
So those folks with vouchers, they're set.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. And also, as a resident that several other people have said, a resident who, as other people have mentioned, goes to restaurants and eats out way too much, I'm willing to pay definitely an increase in meals tax, over 1% to 2%, to whatever will get what we need funded. And also, I agree with the lodging increase tax of 1% and real estate tax increase of 2%, as long as we have expanded tax relief for low-income homeowners. Sorry for my stumbling. For school equity, we must increase the budget as requested by the school board. If it was the school board who cut the $500,000, I'm assuming it's because I don't know, Mr. Murphy, I'm guessing they didn't do that voluntarily because you said you would give them 500 and they said, no, we're good. I'm assuming that they were asked to cut $500,000 out. And as I understand, $500,000 is the amount that was needed for equity, and we cannot use the excuse of not being funded to not get the equity programs we need, or get the programs get the programs that we need into our schools to make them equitable. Just again, please do not let your wealthy constituents and friends talk you out of doing what is right. They will be fine. This is a commitment to racial justice for Charlottesville, and anything less is not acceptable.
Thank you.
My name is Wendy Stanley, and I live in the city, and I own a home in the city. And just like everybody else, since I'm here on a Saturday, I want to make sure you know that I feel like I really want to support this meals tax and this lodging tax. As a homeowner and a city resident, I feel like that the things that you put up there are huge for us to do, not only as a city, but as a community. And we need to be we need to be better than who we are. So I will still eat out approximately 5 dinners a night, because a week. Because, sorry,
Man,
not quite
that's
yet.
impressive.
Right,
That's
but
impressive, man.
No, I could eat 3 meals a day. You never know about that, because I haven't had lunch yet. But I'm still going to do that because I love our going downtown. I love our city. I love our meals, and I'm going to still do it unless somebody teaches me to cook. So thank you very much for the budget that you proposed.
Thank you.
Mr. Murphy said he could teach you. But still eat out, we need you.
Hi, my name is Sonia Bell. I live in public housing. I'm just asking y'all to give us the money so we can rebuild some more houses, because where I live at, I have mold in it. And we need to get these houses fixed because people are getting sick. And I'm tired of watching these hotels. I've been here all my life, watching these big hotels come up and they talking about they can't give us money for more taxes. Come on. And you know, they're building them in our neighborhoods and they're taking the neighborhoods away. So I'm just asking to help with affordable housing and the tax.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Sonia got the knee-high boots on. I see you, girl.
Hi, my name is Walt Heineke. I'm a homeowner in the city. When I teach policy, and when I do that, my students and I talk about this saying that's in the policy world, that there's no policy in heaven, because in heaven you get everything you want. But down here, where we have to make tough choices, we have to make budgets, and those budgets are reflective of values. And the budget that you've put together so far reflects some really positive values in terms of affordable housing and equity and racial justice in this town. And I want to thank you for the work that you've done to date, and to urge you to keep on moving in the same direction. But we're here in this difficult position because of historical sins of commission and omission of mostly white policymakers and white homeowners in this city. The sins of commission are things like redlining that have happened historically. There are things like zoning ordinances and covenants that have happened historically, and we're now finally dealing with those ramifications of those policies. So it's time to make those changes. The sins of omission are basically, for generations, white people have just not done anything about this, about the sins of commission. Most citizens have just not done anything. We've just let it happen. We've let the zoning go. We've let the redlining go. It's time for us to make a commitment and say that the sins of omission are no longer acceptable. So that being said, I want us to start thinking a little bit more about this as a long-term process, right? You're not just setting a budget for this year, right? The housing study shows that we have apparently over 3,300 units shortage of affordable housing, or 3,300 people who are not able to get affordable housing. Your own HAC has basically looked at the numbers and said, and backtracked from where we have to get to from 33 back to zero, right, where everyone's taken care of. And from their point of view, it's a $15 million commitment over, I mean, $150 million commitment over 10 years. So this year, you're actually moving in the direction of making the first year of that commitment, right? But we have to think about the tax increases and the raises in taxes as more of a long-term way of generating revenue so that we can make the $10 million a year for 15 years so that we can get to the 3,300. Right? So it's backtracking, it's backward policy mapping, and that's what we're doing. So how do we get there? I also want to support the idea that we should put $1.55 million into the CAF, because I think it does help with paths to home ownership for people who would not normally have home ownership. But it also addresses flexible needs for homelessness as well. So there are other needs that are being met by that affordable housing fund, and I think we need to put that $1.55 million in it. The Planning Commission was saying, this isn't a way, we're not going to redistribute the budget and get that 1.1 million or 1.55 million. It's an add-on to that budget. So we're asking for that add-on. I think the CHAP should be fully funded at option 2, so that people at $50,000 and lower are really getting the support they need. This is as close as we can get in the state of Virginia to a progressive tax, right? This is as close as we can get to a progressive tax, and that's what we need in this city for justice. In terms of the meals tax, I think at least 1% increase is necessary from 5 to 6. And let me reframe it a different way. If you do that, you are giving people like me who have white privilege the opportunity to contribute to the solution for racial injustice in housing. You're giving me an opportunity. Every time, I'll probably go out more to eat in town if I know that you have an increase in the meals tax, because I know that every time I'm going out, I'm contributing to that goal of reducing inequality in this town, right? So it's actually, I think it should be reframed in a different way. You're giving us the opportunity to contribute to making this town more equitable. Support the lodging tax increase at 1% from 7 to 8. I also think we should think about a 2-cent increase in the real estate tax. And I'm a homeowner in this town. It'll hurt, but I think, again, it's a way of contributing to a solution that folks like me have contributed to over generations and generations. I also think we're at I think when I bought my house, we were at $1.13 at a tax rate. Now we're at 93. I don't see what the hassle is in raising us to 95. You're not asking to go back to $1.13. I know the assessments have gone up, but still, it's a way of generating that revenue. So I think 11.3 at least is a good place to be. You can look at further cuts from the capital improvements budget. You can look at cuts from other parts of the budget. But I think this is the direction that we should be going, and I think you're heading in that direction. Part of this is about increasing the Gini index in this town. The Gini index is an index of basically figuring out how happy people are in town. As a taxpayer and as a citizen of Charlottesville, I want everybody in this town to be happy, right? And inequality does not produce happiness, right? So it's in my benefit for you to make these policy changes, right? So, and I also want to remind you that housing policy is educational policy, right? So the work that you do in housing policy is really important in terms of making dents in the inequality that's happening in our schools. Lastly, I just want to say, let's just reframe this for a minute. In 2017, the white ethno-nationalists and the racists came to this town, right? And they were arguing for a particular ideology. Now think about what the headline should be after you figure out this affordable housing policy and you create this budget. The headline ought to be, the racists came to this town and city council said no. And that's what the headline should be. The racists and the white ethno-nationalists came to this town, and city council, through its policy making and its budget making, said no to that message, that they're not doing that. That's the headline, right? That's what leaders of the capital of the resistance do, right? They acknowledge that we have to address these long-term and present and future-term inequalities, and we have to say no to this ideology that is permeating our country. And this is how you say no. You fully fund the affordable housing, agenda that is before you. So I would urge you to think about those increases in those taxes in a different way. Think long-term and think equity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Michael Payne, city resident. Again, I would just like to reiterate my support for raising the meals and lodging taxes as a way to fully invest in affordable housing. I would also urge council to support fully funding the CHAP program at the higher amount. And again, I would just reiterate that you may be able to balance the fiscal year 20 budget by shifting things around and making half measures on tax increases. But long term, what will the impact of that be? And does that make sense as a responsible fiscal decision long term? And I don't think it does. Is there a cost to increasing taxes? Yes, there is. But there's also a cost to not increasing taxes. And as counselors, your job is to evaluate which of those costs are greater. And so if you're rejecting increasing the meals and lodging tax, the headline should not be council doesn't vote to raise taxes. The headline should be council rejects investment in school modernization and expansion. Council rejects stable fundraising source for public housing long term. Council rejects stable funding source for Friendship Court redevelopment, because not raising taxes means less stable investment in our community. Finally, I would just say, I think you're scaring yourselves a little bit too much about these meals and lodging tax increases. They're perfectly in line with what other localities are doing. It is not a radical decision by any means. It is a reasonable one, and I would encourage council to not consider raising the real estate tax until you have raised the meals and lodging taxes. If you make a half measure on the meals tax and then decide to raise the real estate tax, that will be more regressive than if you raise the meals tax and the lodging tax to the highest amount you're willing to before you explore the real estate tax, particularly if you're not expanding the CHAPEX program to the highest level. Again, the real estate tax should not be off the table, but don't consider it until you've maxed out what you're willing to on the meals and lodging tax. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Hello.
Colette Hall, and I do live in the city and I do own a home. You know, planning the budget, Mr. Murphy, thank you, and Ms. Beauregard, and everyone who does that all year long. The budget is the most important thing the City Council votes on, deliberates about, and considers, and makes decisions on all year, because almost every other decision you make in the coming year is predicated on the decisions you make on this budget, any budget. So this is an essential, most important thing you do. Abraham Lincoln said, you can please some of the people all of the time and all of the people some of the time, but you can't please all of the people all of the time. So when you're figuring, deciding, deliberating about this budget, remember, those are words of wisdom that are true. Everything that I've heard people say they want is all of the people all of the time, and it's just not realistic. As one of the men said, in heaven you can have everything, but this isn't heaven. So therefore, you can't have everything. You have to be selective. Now, I have lived in the city for just about 30 years, and I have been to countless budget workshops and budget sessions. And I remember a time going to budget workshops and budget sessions where there were maybe 3 people there, myself being one of the 3. So it's only been recently that people have been taking an interest in the budget, which is a real shame. But I hear the same theme over and over and over again today, you know, fund fully this, fund fully that. But this is not a personal condemnation of this council sitting before me. In the 30 years I've been here, I have seen the council spend more and more and more funds, and I've seen the service debt rise, which is not a good thing, and I've seen more and more huge multi-million-dollar bonds being floated. Thank God, and I bring this up every year too, we've been able to maintain our AAA bond rating, but it's predicated on the service debt being payable. And when we look at our federal government, I mean, we're in trillion-dollar deficits. This is a state of Virginia that says you have to have a balanced budget. Thank God. I tend to be more of a fiscal conservative. And I see many good things about this budget, but I think part of my issue is not just this council, believe me, councils in the past, and I can name mayors if I had to, have spent irresponsibly. So now when we get to this point and we talk about something like affordable housing, I look back and say about things like, what about the irresponsible spending that was done by councils in the past that now we say, you know, that's a lot of money you're talking about for affordable housing, where in the past we had 4 parking studies on putting meters downtown, taking them out, doing this, doing that, 4 times by 4 consultants. Look at the Belmont Bridge. How many consultants and engineers and whatever designed that how many times? And we spent millions and millions of dollars on consultants and designs that were never used, where now that money could have gone towards something that a lot of these people are advocating here, like affordable housing or helping those people pay their real estate taxes, property taxes through, city grants. Other things like, I read in the Daily Progress, I don't know, last month, the possibility of hiring a person to be a social media coordinator. I mean, please, social media coordinator? I read that and I go, where's your sense of fiscal responsibility? Social media coordinator? I personally do not, this is my personal opinion, obviously. I personally do not think that the Sister Cities program was a good investment in our money. If somebody has enough money to go to Italy or France or wherever these cities are, more power to them. I don't go, I can't go, and I don't think the city should spend money to have a sister city in France or wherever, where maybe that money could have gone toward some of these issues that have been brought up today. So I think in the past, when we're talking about some of the issues of the past, why did we just spend so liberally then, and now we've come across the point where we're saying these are really important issues, and let's raise this tax and that tax and the other tax. My husband is disabled. He's in a wheelchair, but you know what? He works. He works every day from 8 in the morning till 6 in the evening with a half-hour lunch break. He's fortunate enough to telecommute from home. We are also blessed by God, even though he is disabled, to not have to take advantage at this point in our lives, the grant to help pay for our real estate tax on the home that we've made as much as we can handicap accessible by putting in a ramp so you can get from the car into the house, by putting in a handicap bathroom so we don't yet have to live in in an assisted care facility. So we are trying to be good citizens within our own limits. So, it's not that we don't understand the issues, but we have our own issues. And we are saying, if you need to spend millions of dollars on affordable housing, why are you spending money on sister cities? I don't care what they're doing in France or Italy or anywhere else. I don't care about social media. We can live without it. Well, I don't even know what all the sister cities are, ma'am. But the point to me is that I thank you for holding this community forum, as I thank you every year and as I come to it every year and as I speak every year. But I just see this disproportion between what the city councilors in the past considered important, now what they consider important. Now, I know I'm not uneducated. I am, thank God, well-educated. And I'm an intelligent person. And I take an interest in my city, and I try to maintain my properties as best I can. I have a leaking roof. It's going into the walls of the home. I have no choice but to repair that roof. I just got the $10,000 estimate yesterday on repairing that roof. That roof has to be repaired. It is not a renovation. It is not putting $500,000 in renovation. It's repairing property so that it's still livable. And yes, I do have a mold issue. People were talking about not living in a mold. I have a mold issue I have to deal with. So I don't see a balance here. I've never seen a balance here. You know, program after program, where does it end? Where does it stop? I understand about equity. I don't go out to restaurants because my husband's disabled. We choose not to go to restaurants, but people who can go to restaurants should be able to pay the 40 cents more on a $40 bill or whatever, however it's figured out. That's not going to stop them from going to restaurants. I come here and I'm so frustrated when I see these massive bills. And one last thing, the schools. Education is the first way, in my opinion, out of poverty. And schools are valuable, important. I don't even know all the adjectives to use, but we are paying over 1/3 of our budget for schools. And yet we hear all the issues that are wrong with our schools. I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't understand how we can be paying these many millions of dollars and the schools still have major issues and problems. You know, something doesn't gel here. Something's wrong. I don't know the answer. I'm not an educator. I'm a registered nurse. But I don't know how a city can spend 1/3 of their budget on schools and still have these issues. And throwing money at the issues is not and has not been the solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Stand up.
Hi, my name is Jeanette Abby Nader. I'm a resident of the city, a homeowner, and I have a student at the Charlottesville City Schools. First of all, I just want to thank you all for your work, Mr. Murphy, for presenting the budget in such a clear way, and Mayor and City Councilors. Every meeting I go to, I'm continually impressed with the breadth of work that you take on and the scope of issues. I'd like to express support for the affordable housing measures that you have in the budget and support that they are fully funded through the initiatives that you presented. Everyone has been very articulate about those specifics, but I support the tax increases and the funding of those efforts. I also would like to request considering full funding for the Charlottesville City Schools request. I think the schools had, as Catherine mentioned at the very beginning, the specific pieces that were cut in the $500,000 were positions and efforts aimed at building equity in the schools, and I think they're critically important. I was very proud to hear the Charlottesville City Schools say that they're going to start with a $15 minimum living wage. And I wanted to speak specifically to one issue around that, which is not in this budget, but I wanted to just bring awareness to it. So Charlottesville City Schools Nutrition Department is the only department of the schools that is its own cost center. So the Nutrition Department has to make funds up within the money that comes in through the school meals. As you all know, the majority of students in Charlottesville City Schools are in the free and reduced meal program. So the increase in the $15 wage, which I fully support, will, however, affect the nutrition budget and the ability for the budget to maintain balanced. So I just wanted to bring that issue forward because part of equity, in addition to healthy and affordable housing, is healthy food for the majority of our students who go to these schools and get 2 of their meals from the school district. So fully funding the schools now, both with the current budget that's in front of you, the $500,000, and then the investment in the redevelopment, I think will help build a stability for the school where they can address some of these other issues that are in front of them around nutrition. I don't know if that made sense what I said, but I wanted to articulate that. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
My name is Matthew Gillican. I'm a city resident and have a wife who teaches in the city schools and a son who's in first grade. And there's a few things I wanted to mention. The first was that in this document, it describes the raise in pay for city employees as an increase in living wage. And based on everything I've seen of what an actual living wage is in Charlottesville, $15 an hour is not cutting that. It may be more accurate to describe that as the minimum wage for Charlottesville City and Charlottesville City Schools employees. I think UVA is doing this same little weird semantic game where they're patting themselves on the back by saying we're now providing a living wage, when based on what everyone who researches living wage in this area has told us, it's not actually a living wage. So I would ask that that language be changed to more accurately reflect what is overall a really good thing, which is that we're starting to pay our employees better. I wanted to mention the city schools by quoting something Zy Bryant put on Twitter, where she mentioned the budget cuts, and I'm just going to quote her. As a student who has been part of the AVID program since Walker, I know just how important it is that we expand that program. My organizational skills and my enrollment in honors AP courses would be non-existent without the AVID program. We need another Buford AVID program. Adding a STEM teacher is important, as AVID at CHS is now incorporating the engineering CTE requirements into AVID classes. It is important that they aren't just limited to 2 STEM teachers for all of the AVID sections. As a first-gen student, I don't know where I would be in this college app process without AVID. She says, and I agree with her, we need to restore that money back to provide for those specific classrooms. That's a word from one of our most powerful voices, one of our young voices who has taught us all a ton. I think we should honor her and honor the students at CHS by restoring funding to those positions. A couple other things. So there's some hand-wringing over the meals tax increase. We went through the same thing like 4 years ago, where there was a proposal to increase it from 4 cents to 5 cents, and the restaurant industry threw some hysterics, and there was a really nice plan put in place that basically said if we don't generate revenue, if this ends up hurting you as restaurants, we're going to scale back this tax. It didn't hurt them. It didn't hurt their income. The revenue from the restaurants stayed the same. I don't see any reason why that would change now. I think we'd raise it by 1 cent. We get the $2.5 million with a contingency in place that if this does end up hurting the revenue, we re-examine it. I think that meets a lot of our funding gaps. Additionally, the hotel tax, I support increasing that. I think in many senses, I'm fine with increasing the property taxes. I wonder if that's going to be politically expedient right now. But if the hotel and lodging taxes can get us to make this budget be fully funded, I think that would be wonderful. And then finally, I would like to see more funding for affordable housing, both in terms of that $1.5 million, but I actually would like to see the capital budget increased as well. In the bonded projects, we're planning to spend $4 million for the West Main Streetscape and only $3 million towards affordable housing projects. I feel like the West Main Streetscape is a really cool idea that costs a ton of money. We've already set aside $10 million. We've already spent $2 million. We're having a hard time getting state funding. I would love to see more money put into housing versus the West Main Streetscape. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Okay.
May I make a,
All right, so.
May I make a comment, Mayor Walker?
I think we're there.
One of the things that I was going to say this earlier, Ms. Carpenter said it, and I think Dr. Haneke also mentioned it, in terms of framing. So I think it would behoove us when we're talking about these taxes, specifically if we were to go up with the meals tax, and even when we're talking about the lodging tax, if we can let our CVRB, what is it? CRVB? CACVB, thank you, there's too many acronyms. If we can let the CACVB know, as well as our local business owners and our community as a whole know, and advertise as a city that, yes, we've gone up in our meals tax, we've gone up on our lodging tax, but when you come here and you eat out, you are specifically helping us address affordable housing needs. You are specifically helping us address racial equity needs. And then we can market our city in that regard as well. If you want to be a part of advocating for racial justice or making strides towards equity, come and eat downtown, come and stay at our hotels. And I think it's just about, it's a psychological and philosophical shift in how we describe things that would be beneficial to our city. So I would just, those are great suggestions, and we've heard them a couple times before. I just hope that we can think about it like that if we choose to go that route.
Yeah, and I think earlier, and I think that's what I mentioned to Mr. Engel, one of the first meetings we had was how can we, in evaluating these tax increases, do something to market in a way. I think this is a great way to market, but with the marketing does come some cost, or some component of that would have to be done, and if that was a real, approach that we wanted to take, and I don't think it's a significant number, but I think we need to recognize that there may be some associated costs with doing that, but I think that is an interesting approach.
And to your point, like, I think it may, to a certain extent, I'm not gonna say it would kill two birds with one stone, but I know we've heard from some members of the business community, specifically Downtown Business Association, how they would like more marketing dollars, or they need assistance in terms of how they can market and get the word out about the mall and show that we're making strides. So we would be able to address it from a marketing perspective. And I think, as you alluded to, it wouldn't be a significant amount of money. But if we can look at rebranding, how we want people to come, but also provide them some assistance in terms of marketing, it would help us. But we just have to make that decision. So thank you for your comments, Ms. Hill. And
Mayor Walker, can I say something? And thank you, everyone, for coming. It's a beautiful Saturday, and you're here. So really appreciate that. And your thoughts are so well spoken. And I've been doing a lot of thinking and talking to more and more people. I do want to thank, actually, Mr. Murphy for a conversation we had yesterday. That he, because I had been really wrangling with the possibility or the thought of our general revenue fund was that excessive. And when you look at it from the perspective of this city being a company, and most companies, in order to be stable, they do need to reserve usually 3 months worth of operating reserve. And so at 14%, we're actually right at the margin of what is stable. So I understand that now, very much so, that we cannot dip into our reserve fund. And I just want the public to understand that too. That is there for a really good reason. Second, and my argument, I was the one that brought up raising the real estate tax. And the reason why I was a proponent of that, and still am, is because I do not think we can continue to only meet our needs on the backs of 2 industries. It is the restaurant business and the hotel business. So I've also been thinking a lot and looking at the numbers again. And Ms. Hall, your points are well taken. However, infrastructure is critically important. And making that infrastructure, we are going to build a Belmont Bridge. I keep hearing the West Main Street project getting dinged. At the same time, this community keeps saying they want to be sustainable as well as equitable. All of that takes money. In order to become a multimodal city, it takes investment. In order to become a city that doesn't pollute our rivers, we need to be putting in place technologies and with our tree plantings that filter that water before it gets into the Rivanna. So these things take money, and that was West Main was the only project that the state funded this year in our region. We matched it, we leveraged it with university and state money. That's actually smart. But again, looking at all of these needs, and wrangling over the education. And they are, the $500,000 is the amount of money that is actually revolving all around equity. The AVID program is very successful and it's effective. So I am changing my position. I want a 1 cent increase in our real estate. I want a 1 cent increase in our meals tax, and I want a 1 cent increase in our lodging tax. I think that gives us what we need. But I want to share the responsibility. Here I am arguing. I'm wanting to share that responsibility. Public education should be funded by our real estate tax. Everyone is involved with our children, not only 2 industries.
And so, were you gonna?
No, the only thing I said, the one I continue to be the most strongly pushing back on is the real estate tax, because as much as even with more aggressive supports we can do through some of this programming through CHAP, I still fear that there's just so many people out there that are paying rent that no matter how prescriptive we get in these support programs, we're never going to be able to address that concern. And I think I'm just concerned that the more we're pushing that, we're pushing against ourselves and making this even less affordable for so many people who go through that route to live here and are already facing increases in rent given the continued rising assessments. I certainly understand Councilor Galvin's point around with our schools that we all have to share in that. But I continue personally to struggle with increasing our real estate taxes.
And my challenge with that is the cost of rent now. You know, it's pushing a lot of people out, so that's not being necessarily considered. The other thing that I'm going to say that's not going to be, I guess, well received by the schools is, and it's the same comments that I had with the nonprofits. We don't control the school budget. I was the only counselor last year that didn't vote for the school budget. I'm voting for the reconfiguration plan, and I will support the $500,000 if we can figure out where to get it from. What I would have appreciated is the schools letting citizens know that the city council doesn't control. They decided what to cut. They decided why to cut those things. I wouldn't have cut those things. I would have looked in the budget for other things to present to cut. And if citizens wanted to advocate for those, I would have preferred hearing those than for them to cut equity, because that is what all that we're talking about now, and people are going to send us messages. When I'm hearing these conversations, it's around city council not supporting equity. And I think when we're talking about reframing, the school board and the superintendent, that appears to be the intention. And just as I talked with one of the few of the nonprofits about how they were presenting information to get money for CAF, instead of making sure that we are talking about, being impactful and what the outputs look like and how do we really, change the way, things are going. People are supporting it without asking those questions of whether those programs, those nonprofits, are making the impact and are the individuals that we are supposed to be funding. So I think we have to do both. There are a lot of good, amazing things that we can support in Charlottesville, but we can't keep spending money and not getting the results that we desire. And what Ms. Hall said about how much money our school division spends, which is, I talked about it the entire campaign. I stated it with my vote last year. We should have better outcomes, and our children should be doing better, and they're not. And so we have to have that discussion. Funding, yes, but what are you doing with the money? And I have a major issue with, once we fund, we can't ask any other questions or provide any other input or, discuss. So I think that we definitely need to, look at that. And the meals and lodging tax, I definitely support, and I'll support real estate, but it's going to have to be with the progressive. And what I presented for CHAP is, not as progressive as it needs to be. I was just trying to find, a way in without kind of, breaking things, because that's a major difference than how we've been supporting things in the past. And then next time you come, bring 5 friends, because we need more people being vocal about what they support. So thank you.
Mayor Walker, can I say something? Because I do think, because one of the things I was looking over the numbers, and is that with the 111, all 3 taxes, we have the revenue to do the relief.
Mm-hmm.
And then secondarily, for the public, when you look at the impact of the meals tax rate and you look at the impact of a 1 cent increase on the real estate tax, just looking at decile 1, the monthly impact per 1% rate increase for the meals is $1.25 a month. 1 cent increase over what, I mean, granted, people are paying more money because of the evaluations going up, but that 1 cent increase is $1.15 more a month. When you go to the decile 10, the monthly impact is of a meals tax, a 1% rate increase on the meals tax is $6.43. The impact of a 1 cent increase on the real estate tax is $6.20. So they're comparable in what their impacts are on a monthly basis. And I wish we also had been able to adopt the HAC's 20-year plan. 15-year plan. We never brought it forward to our council for formal adoption. So it's not formal policy. I mean, we can say, yeah, but it really is important that we have policies that we adopt that then the public can see why we're funding these things. And so that was a little misstep. It's not, but we're in a gear shift in how we're handling the comprehensive affordable housing strategy right now.
And they just, as the representative of the HAC, that plan certainly was more as an example in terms of just the piece we've seen as part of the broader housing strategy. And so I don't think the HAC or anyone was in a position to be looking at a full long-term. It was just, is this the direction we want to go? At the same time, there certainly was some voiced concerns over how we were looking at allocating funding for this current year. And that's where the CIP additional request was coming from. I just wanted to clarify.
I have some thoughts about the comments about the schools, but I'll reserve them for a later time, because I will say, as a public school educator for 7 years and now as a college professor, there's a whole lot that goes into achieving outcomes for kids. It's a whole lot, and we all want outstanding outcomes. One of my favorite guidance counselors is here, and he spoke, and he didn't even talk about the education piece, but like we say we want different outcomes, there's just a lot of variables that go into it, and us putting the money in for equity is a step in the right direction. I'll leave it at that.
I agree. I'm not
saying you're saying it isn't. I just think for the public's knowledge, and like I've heard that argument from people saying like we spend a lot of money with the schools, they should be achieving more. I'm not saying that's exactly what you're saying.
No, I am saying that.
Okay, well then specifically in that regard. So people say things, not just you, I hear this often.
Yeah.
The school should have better outcomes for the amount of money that we're spending. But if any of us were to spend time in some of our public schools, like I go to Walker once a week, I go to Jackson Vile once a week on the days when I'm not teaching at Virginia State. There are so many different variables. One, that kids are even coming into school with just a lack of basic knowledge and skills that they need to be able to continue to proceed forth. And then when you get to Walker, reading levels, which is part of the reason why we need AVID and you need reading specialists. Reading has a direct tie-in to math. I mean, like the socioeconomic piece, just the social piece as well. There are so many different variables as to why kids do not achieve the outcomes that we believe that they should have, when in all actuality, for some of these kids who are coming to our school at kindergarten with the 3,000 word gap, just the fact that they can get to passing a SOL by the 5th grade is a miracle there in itself. And when we talk about we want them to achieve higher and do better rather when they get to high school and have these other outcomes, like we're not seeing the whole picture. And it's easy for us to say, like from the outside, that this and that should be better, but y'all, like, it's a whole lot to go into it.
So you are saying that you don't think that I think about the whole picture? Is that, or you're not directing all these comments to me? Because I don't want to answer all of them if they're not for me to
I'm not directing all the comments to you, Mayor Walker.
Check. So then I won't answer all of them.
We'll have a nice convo after.
But in terms of process, I would just challenge both ourselves and the school system, both the school board and the superintendent. I just feel like how we got to this number, there hasn't been a lot of clarity, because it was my understanding this is the number that the school board supported and Dr. Atkins put forward. And I also share the concern that it was coming back on council that we were making the decisions as how it's being done. I've addressed this with one school board member who did not realize that was some of the stuff that was going out publicly. And so I just think in the future, maybe we need to even be more proactive. And I thought we were more proactive this year than in years past about getting to something that everyone can feel good about. Because when the school board is presenting this budget to us as their budget and what they're requesting ultimately, that's what I took it as. And if there was anything different, I would have liked to have heard that more vocally when that was being presented.
And I'll just say that I
Okay.
think it's, and I said this on a Facebook Live the other night, that we always get to this place where we're arguing about initiatives or, programs that support equity, or, bridging the gap, or poverty-related issues, and we start pitting them against one another.
Right.
And so you have to be very careful about what that looks like. I support the reconfiguration of the schools because that's something bold and different, and it may work, and it may get us better results, which is what, the school system has presented, to us. And hopefully, if those grade changes work, then we'll start getting some better outcomes for the students.
I think we will.
And I'm well aware, as someone who went through elementary, had 3 kids, all my family almost, through CCS, still have a kid in CCS West. I pay very close attention. And so I'm aware of all the factors. But I just wish this had been presented differently, and I'm going to ask the same questions I've been asking of the restaurant community, of the nonprofit community, and I'm going to make same statements if it's warranted for the school system, which I feel that it is.
Did you want to say something, Mr. Murphy?
Oh, no, I was asking was the air on.
So, Ms. Counselor Galvin, does Mr. Murphy, the real estate tax, does it have to be a full increase, or can it be a half percentage? No.
It can be what we want.
It can be whatever you
Yeah,
set it
it
at.
can be what we
but
want.
We'll bring Mr. Blair.
Okay.
I didn't know Mr. Blair was a mathematician.
Well, he can tell us whether the Code of Virginia allows us to split a cent. How about that?
Yes, you can, because Albemarle County does it every year. I think they're currently 83.9. So
Okay.
they do it down to the 10th of a penny.
Okay.
And I would just ask that we make sure, though, that we need to be able to fund all the things that we are saying that we want to fund.
So that's my question to you. The other night, you said that you would entertain a 2% lodging. Would you still entertain that with the
No,
half?
not by my going up to a full cent on the meals tax.
So you're still
Okay.
111?
Yeah, because it gets more revenue. It's actually,
Yeah.
my first recipe, which was 1 cent on the real estate, half cent on the meals, and then 2 percentage points on the lodging, gave us $3.63 million. By adding going to the full 1 cent on the meals, we're now at I would think, 4.6 million at least.
I calculated 4.5, but I could be off.
And so that would be what we're saying is that, and that does allow us to do the more generous CHAP program, which would then address the very low income people, because you're absolutely right, that we've got to try to make our tax structure more progressive.
I think
So, that's why it's kind of like you raise money and then have to give money back, which is the problem with trying to get the revenue to cover all the programs. We're going to have to give money back. So I'm not sure what the final fallout will be in terms of what's available to cover the schools. And then, it is looking as, and I would like to bring up again in the future of being able to then fund a synthetic TIF in some of our growth corridors, because then that could be a way to have dedicated funding streams to our affordable housing fund, so we're not dealing with this every year. And you get a bigger jump when you raise the rate as well as but it's...
Because I can tell, could you just briefly just explain what that is? Because some folks in the audience I can tell are not
So
clear.
the synthetic TIF, a tax increment finance district, is one where you'd have an area of the city where you would designate that the differential between years of tax evaluations going up, a certain percentage of that would be dedicated to going to a particular earmark. So for example, if, for example, West Main Street, in the last 5 years, that value of tax revenue to the city went from $300,000 a year to $3 million. If we had had a synthetic TIF on that, you could take a certain percentage of that differential in real estate and have it dedicated to something of a social good. Every year, automatically. It's a policy, and we can do that. And my first idea was to apply that to Water Street, because when anybody looks at Water Street Extended and Water Street, you've got code, you've got all the detached brownstones on Water Street Extended. As they come online, the differential between before and after property tax, real estate tax revenue is very big. And you say 30% of that goes to the Charlottesville Affordable Housing Fund, it's automatic. And it was done in Arlington, Virginia on the Columbia Pike project.
Can I try to
Yeah.
bundle it up? So, in the event that there is support for a 1-1-1 tax scenario, for me, I want to put out some assumptions that I think I'm hearing from council throughout deliberations, so that I can really, for Tuesday night, present you with a proposal that really advances our discussions. So, in a 1-1-1 scenario, we generate roughly $4.1 million. 3.3 we already accounted for, right? So we're level, essentially. And so in round numbers, although real estate's like 771%, we'll call it 800,000 for our discussion. Assuming that you want to add $1 million to the Affordable Housing Fund, which I think is about the right number based on a number of discussions we've had, and that there's a possibility that there'll be some addition to CHAP, maybe some money back based on the idea that you're using both of these kind of travel and tourism sectors towards advertising of some kind for those industries. I'm kind of, I know that Commissioner Divers hadn't crunched any of these numbers yet, but I wonder, as a placeholder, whether you'd entertain also maybe the addition of some number of dollars towards our rental assistance program. Not the CSRAP, but the one that's administered by Commissioner Divers for regular landlord-tenant relationships. Because there is an impact, not just for homeowners, which is what CHAP is going to impact, right? But for folks who are renting homes and apartments in the city. And so in that vein, I would propose that we'll bring back to you a plan that utilizes the 1-1-1 scenario with $1 million more in the CAF, an additional $200,000 on top of the manager's plan for CHAP towards whatever scenario council agrees to, $200,000 towards...
Option 2.
Huh?
Option 2.
We got mixed up, so we've lost track.
Let me get where I can get. Another $200,000 towards our rental assistance program administered by the commissioner, and $200,000 back out of those taxes towards advertising for those industries, or whatever way marketing you want to think about that. It's about $800,000 from what I'm looking at outside of revenues that our team would then have to go back, crunch, find, however we do it. You know, on the matter of the schools, I just want to clarify that by formula, we were supposed to give the schools $2.2 million, and we exceed the formula, which is our own policy, every single year. And if you'll remember, when we were all together with the school board, we were talking about that we were going to give 3.08, right? And Dr. Atkins literally called me during the end of our process and before she was going to meet with her board and said, what else can you do? And we spent a lot of time to come up with an additional $280,000, which is how they got to the $500,000, which is a number that the superintendent and I agreed to, that there were certain strategies that she could implement a year later, and that half of the money, or more, actually $300,000, as I recall the conversation, was going to come out of their fund balance, and it was only going to be half of the fund balance. It's my understanding that the policymakers on the school board rejected using fund balance, even for a one-time expense, which was grant match, which doesn't, particularly make sense because it's not a recurring cost.
And what was that amount?
I think it's a $75,000 grant match to leverage another couple $100,000. I'm getting a nod from Ms. Torres, so I believe.
But they're reluctant to pull out the reserve because they have very few dollars, relatively speaking, in the reserve. And in the event in which they have a major issue, they would essentially have to come back to us to help them.
Well, and that's where my question is, because I wanted to raise this, thank you for bringing this up again,
Yeah.
is when Councilor Galvin and obviously Mr. Murphy talked about this yesterday, it's enlightening for all of us, I get the impression that we have our own set of dollars that we set aside, including the school boards is part of our budget. So I would think that we are the safety net for their overall budget, because that's the percentage that we have allocated of our 17% of ours in case there's a major concern that comes up that's unplanned. Is that not right, Mr. Murphy?
Our budget is separate and distinct from theirs.
No, but I'm saying, like, if we're saying a percentage of our budget, the 14 plus 3, and we're having all those conversations around our rating, those things are set aside, saying something might come up that was unplanned. That something could be something with our school system.
Because if I, to piggyback on that, it's a $188 million budget, but that includes what we give to the schools.
That's correct.
So that is, Councilor Hill's point is well taken.
So I think that's what
We are covering the schools by
but that's the
preserving our
security-
reserve
sorry.
fund.
That's the security that I think they need to hear from us.
Okay.
Because I think just
They don't
talking to a
realize
few
that.
school board members and others, that's their concern. If something does happen, do y'all have us?
Well, I don't
Stop
think-
that, Mayor Walker. Thank you.
I just don't know how else we could.
And
Thank you, Mayor
colleagues,
Walker.
I'm not going to increase taxes anymore. We've got to have some discipline. 111 is really pretty darn amazing in 1 year. So I do think we need to rely on the staff at this point to fit within that framework. That's just my position.
All right.
So, just the premise of bringing that to you all on Tuesday is that there are 3 people who support the 111 plan. So, can I get some kind of understanding from the council? I'm aware of where Ms. Galvin is.
For me, yes.
Yes.
No.
What do you support?
I 1-1.
Huh?
I could get to 1-1. The real estate, I'm continuing to struggle with.
So would you support the 1-2 for lodging?
No.
1.5?
I'm at 1-1. And I feel like I said on Thursday that I would rather lean in on an anticipated surplus to get to us to the 11.3 where we want to get to. And so that's where I am.
Mayor Walker, are you? Are you 111 or?
I'm thinking.
You know, these people.
I think a half-cent increase in real estate, I would support that.
So, then how would that cover the chat?
That won't cover the chat.
It won't cover the chat, which is your idea.
Oh, listen, we're not going to do that.
No, I'm saying, okay, well,
No, I mean,
I won't
the-
be able to make it on Tuesday because I have to teach Tuesday night. But just for the record, just so you know where I stand, I'm 111, and I think
No, I
that we
think
need to
my,
move forward.
We're talking about this on Monday night too, by the way. And I just don't want to
Right.
forget the fact that we have 4 like, public hearings on this. So that's why I hate to be too, like, I don't want to say anything firmly until we really have every opportunity for the public to weigh in on this.
But staff needs to be able to
No, I
work
know.
on something.
No,
That's why
yeah,
the
no,
clarity is
giving us
important.
direction, yeah. Well, I stated mine.
Yeah, I thought, so, yeah. I definitely support the lodging and meals tax.
But there's a big gap.
I will support the real estate tax. But if we can get to maybe the 2 cent on the lodging, if there could be a third vote for that, I think that would be better.
Who your second?
Kathy?
I
I'm
really,
just-
I don't want to go 2% on the
understand.
lodging.
All right.
Yeah.
We're making the sausage, people.
In front of you as usual.
And I mean, and Mr. Heineke mentioned housing policy is education policy. The schools need the partnering of the city, and the city's investing in housing and neighborhoods. It's the what you have to do. And we actually wrote a paper together in 2010 about this is an important piece. So I'm glad we've gotten to this point.
Did you have a question?
I would like to say, just real quick before we finish, I mean, if we are, the revenue that we need, if we are just breaking even, we have to think about those huge goals that we're saying that we have, and how do we fund those dollar amounts once they start pouring in, after the schools get their reconfiguration plan done, when we get the numbers, the final numbers from PHA and housing, when we're still looking at, equity within our workforce, and then all the other things that the city demands from trails and greenways, streetscapes. I mean, the Fifth Street plan, I mean, I think that's very different, since since we'll be talking about accidents at that location and things like that. We're going to have to come up with the funds to fix that, which is very different from what I think was being asked for on Elliott. So there are a lot of issues that'll come up that we'll need to fund, and and just breaking even and asking our departments to cut is not going to probably always do the job. Now, I'm all for cutting when, what we're funding is not producing results.
Well, maybe we could make that item number 1 on the work plan for our new city manager.
All right. So any other comments? All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you all for being here.